We're lucky. We've got Dom Conlon. He's a poet, and often, he's heard on the BBC radio, and whose school visits have had children shouting out, "I am a giant!" And I'm sure I'll get Dom to probably explain that to us a little bit more, because it's Dom is inspired by space, mythology, and cake. So, Dom, can you just explain that further for us, please?
Hello. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Today. Special day for us all.
Thank you.
Two of my picture books are about a little boy who's called Tiny the Giant.
Yeah.
And he's a tiny little giant. My son gave me the idea about 5-6 years ago now. That he said, Daddy, I know a tiny giant. And I thought, I like the idea of that. So I thought, what would a tiny giant want to do? He'd want to really shout to the world that he was a giant. So that's what he does in the first book. He goes around shouting, "I am a giant."
No, that's great. Like we say, sometimes we don't realise where the inspiration comes from, and it's a great credit to your son and yourself to be able to put that together, and therefore being able to be an author there as well. In a day and age where people aim to write within a 280 character limit or a short blog post, so what impact has there been on the attention span of readers and creative writers? Because we know that Twitter, when you had to write a tweet, you were limited, and then they've doubled that amount of characters as well. And then even when you used to write texts as well, SMSs, you had to curtail them. That sort of affected so much of how you would like to elaborate and construct some beautiful sentences. But the world is changing. So what's happening to the attention span? Are we going down a road which is not very creative, I guess?
In many ways, as a poet, it's benefited me enormously because that's kind of what I do. I don't write long poems. I don't write novels in poem form at the moment. Anyway, although there are some amazing authors out there like Sarah Crossan who do write in long poems. But I think with poetry, you've got a great tradition, especially Japanese poetry with the haiku, where the brevity of it can help us. And it's not always a good thing. We get perhaps a little sick of politicians just trotting out sound bites. But with children's literature, you've got everything. You've got short form, but you've also got some very, very long novels and Harry Potter books. They're up to 750,000 words long. They're big, weighty kind of tomes, and children absolutely love them and are completely gripped by them. So I think, like everything, there's a mix of sometimes, attention span shortening of those can be an issue, and in other times, it's not an issue. So it depends on, like everything, on the person and what we want at the time.
Dom, talking about appealing to different level of people. You have books aimed at children and adults as well. Who is it easier to write to for? Or is it any different?
I don't tend to think of the person I'm writing for. When I write, and it surprises me, I will go through months and months of my poetry just being, I suppose, read by children, and I can see that it's suitable for children. But even when I'm writing about more complex things, even when I'm writing, last year I spent quite a lot of time writing about loss. So I lost my parents-in-law, both of them within a week of each other. And so I turned to poetry to write about those. But even those poems, I think, were for everybody. I tried to make everything as accessible as I possibly can. Some things are funny and perhaps more naturally lean towards children. Others, perhaps less so. But I try to just write about the subject first and let it find its own format, really.
Would you be willing to share one of your short poems that are around 280 characters? There's a challenge for you. No, you don't have to do it right now because I've probably put you on the spot there. But I can ask you a substitute question while you think of something, unless you're ready to go now.
No, I'm frantically tapping away on the computer now.
Right. Okay. So let me just ask you this question, because we talked a little bit about how important it is about literature and also how then you can manipulate the words to say anything, because it's so powerful. It has the ability to change people's hearts, minds and soul. And simple words like one statement. I remember Margaret Thatcher back in the day, God bless her soul, she said these 3 words when the Iron Curtain has come down. So that in itself, with just those few words, meant so much. So writing something, even in a short space of word, has such massive implications. Okay, hopefully I gave you a little bit of time
there
to give us something. Otherwise, you can also talk about how important it is to find a good illustrator. Because obviously through your books, you need someone to do your drawings for you, and they're obviously illustrations. Because it's really hard to find a good illustrator that can encapsulate what it is those few words need to say, so a young child's mind can read the words and then relate it to the illustration.
I think illustrators have the hardest job, and they're the thing we approach, especially in picture books, and a lot of children's literature, which is perhaps more heavily illustrated than literature for adults. But they have the hardest job because a good illustrator will bring their own vision to a text, and that's what's important. Things like We're Going on a Bear Hunt by Michael Rosen and Helen Oxenbury. Helen brought her own ideas to that book, and she's just as much an author as Michael Rosen is of that text, and that's amazing. I know I've been lucky to work with some amazing illustrators, and it always surprises me that they see things or they want to say things that I'd not thought of, and that kind of collaboration can only strengthen any kind of creativity. Illustrate, and even for adults, from the cover illustration, it's the cover illustrations which draw us in, even if the inside of the book isn't illustrated at all. So illustrators are just the best, the best people. Completely have all the respect for them.
Dom, you can read your books online, and you also give away your adult books for free. Tell us, why do you do that?
I want them to be accessible. I think I could hide them and lock them behind a price point, but I think if people like them enough, then there's plenty of ways for them to either show their appreciation financially if they can, or if they can't, just to say, thanks for writing that. And you make your way in the world, and if you can give more than you take, then I think it just helps, really. I think it helps everybody. And we write in order to make the world a better place. I'd like to earn a little bit more money to make things a little bit easier, of course. Most people would. But there's always ways. You find a way to do that.
Yeah, it is. I think it's a fantastic idea. It's really good because, as you said, to make the world a better place than what it is today, it's so important to get knowledge out there, isn't it?
It is, and to celebrate creativity. I think it's vital. It's the thing that makes us want to explore ideas. I've got a book of poetry about space, and so I love science. But when I talk to children about it, I said the science is really important, but it's the creativity and knowing about our place in the universe and knowing where we fit in that fuels that exploration of science and that thirst for knowledge. It's understanding what it means to be human that gives us that kind of perspective on science, I think.
So as we... Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, yes, please go ahead.
I have a poem if you want.
Love to, Dom. Love to.
Okay, so this is called Red Bike, and it was written as I was looking at a bike of my son's lying out in the garden, and I'm thinking, he's 10 years old now, and I'm thinking, as I do sometimes, thinking to when he's 18 or 20 or 30, and things change. He moves out and so on. So I thought of him asking me a series of questions about his old red bike, and I performed this in his classroom a few months ago, and it just at the end of it, he read the questions and I gave the answers. So it was a wonderful sort of partnership that we had in the classroom, and I almost choked at the end. I was like, oh my goodness. So this is called Red Bike.
Yeah.
Where is my red bike? The ragbone man took that to sell for his supper. Who bought its shine? The rain took that to polish its tears. Who bought its bell? Time took that to mark out its years. Who bought its tyres? The wind took those to carry its clouds. Who bought its seat? The mountain took that to help the sky rest. Who bought its chain? The river took that to pull all its fish. Who bought its journeys? I kept those for when you no longer visit.
That's pretty powerful and quite thought-provoking. That's lovely, Dom. Thank you very much for that. Thanks for sharing that. That's wonderful. So as we sort of come to an end of our conversation, we're discussing World Book Day. Would you care to share with us what your favourite book is and why?
Oh, I have a book for every occasion. I have.
Okay, let's make it easier for you. What about how you're feeling today?
Today, I think, what would I be turning to today?
Yeah.
I find, for the playfulness of words, here we go.
Yeah.
For the playfulness of words, I would perhaps turn to poet E. Cummings, he was probably the one who inspired me most when I was at college studying, and my English tutor saw that I was beginning to like poetry and respond to that in classes. And he just said, I think you would like E. Cummings. And he was absolutely right. Mr. Birch, who I'm still in touch with after all these years, that was 25 years later. And he gave me E. Cummings, and he's a wonderful poet working in the 50s, and such a freshness and love of language that always cheers me up.
Okay. Thank you very much, Don. Much appreciated.
My pleasure. Thank you both.
We look forward to having you on the Drive Time show again. Hopefully not next year, but way before then.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dom. Thank you.
My pleasure. Anytime. Bye-bye.